full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio, Education Tonight. Viewers, just a little bit behind the scenes, like a countdown before the show starts, and my daughter just ran in and saw the countdown. She was determined to get to zero to shout go. I think she just missed it. But on the left-hand side of my screen, we have a returning host from Education Tonight. We have Mr. Brent Poland. Good evening, Mr. Brent Poland. Are you okay?
I'm good. I'm still on Borneo time at the moment, so I'm 7 hours behind. So there might be a bit of a lag time. So yeah, it's been an interesting couple of months for me. Good to be back in the Teachers Talk Radio hot seat.
Yeah. So if you don't know, we had Brent kind of stood as for Parliament in the last election, and then he scooted off to Borneo on the World Challenge trip, which is a fantastic experience. But obviously it's left you, it's that thing I said to you in the week, isn't it, about I did it last year, to kind of thinking that the last week would be a good time to go off on a trip, but actually it's absolutely kind of shattering, isn't it? Absolutely shattering.
Well, yeah, I mean, as a geographer, somebody who's an environmentalist who took the kids on a conservation project in Borneo, and the physical trek, team leadership's basically like a souped up Duke of Edinburgh, but 8,000 miles away, and 35-degree heat and 80% humidity, with lots of bugs, spiders, orangutans, green sea turtles, hog-spittle turtles. And, you know, it was quite an experience for 8 children, and quite exhausting, of course. Getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to try and, stream the England match, which I wish we hadn't have done because it was quite boring, never mind. And obviously disappointing in the end for the students, but hopefully.
Are you a big England fan? No comment.
I'm saying nothing. I mean, I will say it's quite ironic that I went on a World Challenge myself in 1996 to Ecuador, and we watched it. The semi-final, wasn't it? Semi-final against Germany when Gareth Southgate ironically missed a penalty.
Yeah.
So there I am on a World Challenge as a teacher, watching Gareth Southgate's England. So it seems that every time Gareth Southgate gets to a sort of final, I'm on a World Challenge, which is interesting. But some interesting conversations there in Malaysia, ironically, linking to what we're going to talk about tonight, and some interesting conversations with some of the conservation project about climate change, plastic pollution. We took 44 bags of plastic pollution off the beaches that the turtles were ingesting. And all I can say is that I was involved in my own David Attenborough documentary, because what we were doing with the turtles, measuring them, saving their eggs, putting them into a nursery, it was such an experience. But talking to some of the locals about, the climate and climate change, the monsoons out of sync, the rains are all unpredictable. And then seeing, the conflict between the conservationists, the government who is using the petrochemical industry, and tourism that wants to expand. And it was literally like a lot of my geography case studies. You were seeing the reality of the world we live in, and how our students cope with that.
Well, that's the power of being out on trips, isn't it? You kind of you see it live, which would be a fantastic experience. And
education doesn't just happen in the classroom. That's the thing, and education is where you find it, and that's what's interesting to note is that we're a comprehensive school, but the majority of students that we came across doing these were in private schools, and we were the only ones who were from what I would say is a comprehensive school or bog standard school. These are the opportunities, the cultural capital that you get from the private sector that you don't get, and that's one of the reasons why I believe in doing that. But I can tell you, 2 weeks away from my family, 2 weeks at the end of term, and 2 weeks with younger students, because we were taking 14-year-old was the youngest student we took to 16-year-old, was a tough ask. We'll have to reflect on that and come up with a better way of doing that. But
But should we set up tonight's show then? So we're going to look at this new look. Well, the kind of the story that came out on Saturday in the Guardian that kind of said that Bridget Phillips and her team were now looking at behaviour as and looking more closely about behaviour, and particularly inclusion and exclusion. And we'll kind of have a deep dive into what's going on with behaviour at the minute. And then halfway through the got Dr. Heary coming on, who's going to help us kind of talk through this potentially this new pay offer maybe that's coming through and see kind of where we are with that. But we are pleased, Brent, and that we're back with John. So do you want to do hello, John? Or
hello, John.
Hello, John. Hello, my old friend, John Catt, who's who sponsors the show. It's brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publisher of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore a full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Which is fantastic. And 8 weeks of doing that with Hannah and Paul, and they've managed to stay behind that screen. 5 minutes with Brent, and he's trying to peep through the curtain of the John Catt thing. I don't know if that improves the ad or discredits it. I don't know, but there you go. Thank you very much, John.
How dare John get in front of me like that?
Yeah, thank you, John, for all your support. Right, so let's get into our first topic, behaviour. So this kind of story leaked out in the on Saturday as through the Guardian about behaviour and about the DfE and the team around Bridget Phillips were looking at behaviour, and then almost straight away it was discredited. And I think she felt enough about that to kind of go on to the airways. So if we do have the clip from Bridget Phillips on, I think it was on LBC, to hear what she said.
While I have the benefit of you on the line, can you clarify a story that was in the Observer yesterday, suggesting that frequent suspensions, isolation booths and strict behaviour regimes could be phased out in England after work done by, I understand, someone who's assisting you in an organisation called Centre for Young Lives? Is that the plan of the Labour government?
No, I'm afraid there was some inaccuracy around that. What I can say to your listeners is that a Labour government expects high standards where it comes to behaviour within our schools. We know that in order for children to learn, they have to be in calm, orderly environments where they get the support that they need from our teachers and school leaders and our back school leaders in the tough choices that they sometimes have to make. It should, of course, be a last resort. I know it is a last resort, and it's the last thing that school leaders want to be doing in terms of excluding young people. And parents have got responsibilities as part of that process. I also think government's got responsibilities too, and that's why the plans that we're setting out, where it comes to, for example, more mental health support in our schools, the need to reform our system for support with children with special educational needs and disabilities.
Children will be,
also
unruly
a
children
part of that.
will still be suspended, Secretary of State, just to clarify that.
Of course, school leaders should retain that important step. It's not something they do lightly because they know the consequences, but there are consequences of not acting. I completely understand the disruption that can be caused to the wider school community.
Is it true that the government's behaviour czar, who obviously you inherited from the Conservatives, Tom Bennett, will be leaving his post, as also reported yesterday? Is that true?
I genuinely have no idea where that report has come from because, no, that is not the case.
Okay.
Okay, so you don't get long for a honeymoon period in politics. Kind of you're straight into the leaks and the kind of people trying to find their own little kind of leverages with politicians. Obviously, you were away when that broke. What were your kind of initial thoughts, Brent, when that kind of story came in earlier on this week?
Well, I did read it out when I got back to civilization, out of the jungle and into the capital city of Kuching. And the irony was that I was watching Malaysian television. The top news story was that the Prime Minister was not going to give pay rises to teachers who can't discipline children. And that was the top story. Second story was cracking down on cyber criminals and cyberbullying. And I was watching that news story. I was like, gosh, they've got the same issues that we've got. They've got unruly children, they've got teachers trying to cope with it, and they have social media out of control. And it made me reflect and think, with the students I'd taken away, who sometimes, in the residential, I had to question their behavior and think, why was the behavior different to previous groups I'd taken? And then I sort of hit upon, well, we haven't imprinted on them. We haven't had the same length of time. They haven't been on the same amount of school trips. Is the relationship between me and the students stronger as it used to be? And obviously, one of the things you get out of school trips is that strong relationship. And as a veteran teacher, I've always sort of prided myself on some of the behavior management I've had. But even I've found that traditional behavior management is under attack. And it's under attack. I almost think there's a bit of a civil war going on at the moment between forces who are saying schools are draconian institutions that are Victorian and they're destroying the children. And you're getting, lots of educational psychologists giving their 10 tuppence worth saying about isolation booths and about draconian uniforms and silent corridors and slant and all the rest of it. And they may have a point. Some of the rules in schools are a reaction to, what's happening in society. And you actually think about society. I don't think it's the kids' fault. I think it's their parents who don't know how to behave. Let's see lockdown for that evidence. I think it's the institutions of banking, churches, politicians, you name any institution of authority. Police, hello. Let's use restrained force in Manchester. I don't think so. We actually think about it.
Did we get like actual? I mean, obviously, kind of. She rejected the statements that were made on Saturday. I think she then went on to say, I think I've got this right. If you can kind of confirm this, that Tom Bennett hasn't left his post. That was kind of an untruth as well. But the difficulty is that there wasn't actually. And we went through this. We went through all the election stuff. Is that there isn't actually kind of a firm policy there in terms of what are the values that this new government are going to bring into the system for discipline. Yes, I think everyone absolutely agrees that all children should be taught in a calm, safe environment. I don't think there's kind of an argument there. The question is kind of how to achieve it, isn't it? It's the how that is the question that's being debated so widely.
I mean, look, the previous government seemed to have some sort of plan, i.e. they were encouraging the likes of your Catherine Birbalsings and Tom Bennett's and Stricklands and people like that, who were, talking about turning schools around by going back to the old school methods. And again, as somebody who sits between both methods, I do believe that we need structure, order, we need good role models. That's what my previous point was, is that our children aren't getting good role models. And I think the only place they're getting any authority and any consistency sometimes is school. And that's where the pushback comes. But there is a social contract at the moment that seems to be being undermined because, again, you look at the local newspapers and there's always a parent who's kicking off because their child doesn't get to the prom, because they're wearing the wrong shoes, because their haircut's the wrong length. It's almost like the press is out there looking for every sort of little tidbit with, a parent with that compensation face that looks like with some child who's got a crazy haircut going, my child's been excluded because they've got this crazy haircut. And they always get, I mean, you read between the Facebook post, you've always got two sides. You've always got one set of people saying, they're the rules. You knew the rules. What are you complaining about? That's the way life is. Get on with it. And then it's the other side going, schools going too far. Schools, how dare schools? This is curtailing individuality. So my point is, I think there is a philosophical civil war going on, not just within education, I think within society as well, where people are, what's the nature of rules? And I think that's leading into schools. Now, what is Labour trying to do? I don't know. I know what the previous government's philosophy was, and that was to be more in line with the likes of slants, and they were, modeling that type of behavior. And again, is this a leak towards a shift? And that shift is more towards a softer approach. The problem is when you say it's towards a softer approach, that makes it sound as if you're not going to support schools and you're going to put parents first, children's needs first. It's that kind of child-centered education thing where, they're talking about poverty, they're talking about SEND, they're talking about disadvantaged pupil premium. And that's where I sometimes get a little bit upset, because is a person who probably ticks all those boxes. I'm not saying my behavior at school was exemplary, but I knew I was. My parents knew that I was. And when it comes down to it, I don't always accept that students' behavior is driven by some of those factors. I think there are just sometimes naughty children.
Let me just read some of the stuff that was in that article, because it is interesting. I know obviously what Bridget Phillipson has said, but there was a direct quote in the article from Stephen Morgan, who said he's determined to get to grips with the causes of exclusion. Again, not saying that, but the data that was in the article was 787,000 pupils were suspended in 2022 to 23. And Dan Rosenberg, a partner in the law firm Simpsons Miller, who represents students who have been spending too much time in isolation, says that in some strict academies, trusts, I found that over 25 pupils have spent over 40 days a year in isolation. He went on to say that these are sometimes children with ADHD and autism who have sometimes not yet been formally diagnosed. They've been sent to isolation rooms repeatedly. There's a lot going on in home. And then there's this kind of quote at the end, which I really like just to kind of ask your opinion on. There's a lot going on at home because they were living in poverty. So obviously there's a lot to unpack there. There's this thing, first of all, this thing about the kind of the failing support functions around school. We know that, all of those individual systems are kind of creaking anyway. People that do want to get kind of diagnosis for ADHD and autism are finding that very difficult at the minute to get those diagnoses. That they're feeling, those parents are kind of rightly thinking, well, we've probably just not got the final stamp from the doctor to say this is the case. However, we are thinking this is the case, so we're not getting this diagnosis. And all I'm seeing is my child going into school, not conforming to a very strict regime because of a need, and then being put in an isolation booth straight away.
Well, here's your contradiction. You send children into a school every other child, and that's what school is. School can bend a little bit, but when schools start being forced to bend this way or that way, the whole social contract breaks down. Let's apply the same principle to teachers. Shall we have different rules? I'm an ADHD teacher. Should I have different rules? Should I turn around and swear in the middle of class and say, oh no, because I'm an adult. That's right, because I've had to learn. I don't buy that. I really don't buy that. I really think we don't do these children any favors in life if we just say, they're from a poor background. They've got a lot going on at home. Some of the most best-mannered children I've ever taught have actually been children with some of the worst circumstances and disadvantaged backgrounds. And some of the worst children I have taught have come from middle-class homes with parents who are so busy. I really resent that sort of thing, that whole idea that poverty or SEND, it just should, and I think, unfortunately, too often that is used as a kind of, we expect different from that child. Because, and don't get me wrong, it is a case-by-case basis where you look at the needs of individual children. And the problem is schools aren't being honest sometimes, because a lot of schools just cannot staff or meet the needs of individual children, because the NHS isn't meeting their needs. The local authorities ain't funding their SEND. There's no teaching assistants. Yeah. I'm a qualified teacher. I'm not a psychologist. I am not a psychotherapist. I'm a teacher. And I think is that
the issue? There's just not enough resource in the system.
We're being honest. We're way beyond our mission. We're way beyond our specialism. And I can sit down and do a little. My wife's a psychologist. I'm not. I didn't train to be a psychologist. I use psychology in the classroom. But what we're being asked as teachers now to do is way beyond our remit. And should we get it wrong, the consequences for us now, nobody gives us second chances and third chances and says, let's treat that teacher differently. That's just the way life is. Schools need help. They need somewhere else. If you're excluding children, continually excluding, that's not working. So there does need to be some other area where those children, you genuinely say, I'm sorry, mainstream education at the moment and this child isn't just working. This is somewhere else we can educate these children where we can then reintegrate them back into school. There doesn't seem to be that. It's whack all the kids into school, hope for the best, and then judge schools and the number of exclusions they've got and the number of suspensions. Head teachers are afraid sometimes to exclude, suspend. The unions are on strike in some schools because they aren't safe.
Yeah, and we had that show. We had that show, didn't we, about the school? I've forgotten where the school was now, but
numerous schools been on strike.
We've just had a message there from Paul. Thanks for getting in touch with us tonight, Paul. Getting to the causes is great, but I hope they don't stop schools using suspensions or exclusions in the meantime, as that would be horrendous consequences for schools in the meantime. I guess this is where we are with a lot of things at the minute, aren't we? We're kind of the teacher on the edge of change, the big change, but it's kind of waiting. There isn't the next thing to kind of kick in, so we're kind of in this kind of no man's land at the minute. Fig the moving teacher, Puff the Magic Dragon. I remember that. Should SEN be an excuse for negative behaviour?
No, it shouldn't. If anything, we have to work harder with children with SEND to be consistent. Consistency is always the thing. You need consistency, and it's really hard to do consistency without systems, but you need systems in school, and those systems have to meet the needs of the majority as much as we can. And I'm all for inclusion to a certain extent, but we don't have the resources sometimes. We just don't have the staffing. And that means we have parents who are also quite powerful now, and you get parents who push and push and push, my child. And I get why, because they've gone through, to get to us at secondary, they've gone through primary, not being diagnosed. They've gone through the NHS, not being diagnosed. I think schools now are getting a lot of frustrations that aren't just about school. They're about other aspects of being dragged into school as well. I think a lot of these parents are traumatized by the mental health lack of support. If Labour really is serious about tackling this, get the Sure Starts back, get the free school meals, get your staffing back, give us the tools, and not just say, oh, we're going to just include more children in school. We need the resources. Class sizes. How am I expected to get to the needs of children when I've got 30 children? 30 children in a class. How can I give 1-to-1 when I've got, you've got, that's just unrealistic. That's not fair. Reduce the class sizes. And you can only reduce the class sizes if you increase the number of teaching staff, and you only increase the number of teaching staff if you recruit and retain more. So
yeah, but something's got to happen. I get the frustration probably within the DME at the minute and the teaching profession is that this is where we are now, isn't it? This is we need to look at the game that's in front of us, and it doesn't seem from anything that Rachel Reeves said that there's going to be kind of a massive influx of cash into the education system, certainly not in the short to medium term anyway. So we've got this this situation where there's some students who cannot at the minute behave in accordance to the rules that have been made by the school. So I guess the question is there a way of kind of just a change? I mean, rules are a concept, aren't they? They can be changed and moved, or do we need to actually as a sector say, no, this is the line? And then, if and then there's obviously there can be lots of reasons for not adhering to behavior, but ultimately that is the line. And therefore, if your child falls short of what we expect, then suspension and exclusion still has to be within the toolkit.
I think there needs to be consistency across the sector. I agree, but it has to be red lines as well. Violent conduct, violent behavior, drugs, stuff like that that's brought into school. There has to be, for the safety of the children in school, the safety of the staff as well, there has to be red lines. Yeah. There is in society. Understand that we have children who turn into criminals. I've taught children who've turned into criminals. Now they're in mainstream education. They're not, you understand, we have children who will end up in prison. And that's really, really sad. And I've taught children who've ended up in prison, and I've given them 5 years of the best education possible. But it's choice. When it comes down to it, people choose. The children have an element of free will and choice. Their behavior is partly down to them as well. And I think too often we say, oh, it's the fault of this, fault of the other. I'm really sorry. Take some responsibility. I'm tired of people saying it's not my fault.
Can I challenge that thing about choice though? If you've got an undiagnosed need that maybe you are not probably aware of, or you don't have parents, I hate to say the kind of middle class parent thing that can chase it and push it, but you are genuinely unaware of mental health, SEN need, or whatever. And yes, what's being presented is a choice. However, there's an undiagnosed issue underneath all that. I mean, there's loads of messages coming in, Brent.
Yeah,
so just
there is that. But there are also
just read out 3 messages.
Yeah.
Paul's just said it took 2.5 years for our school to move on a child with emotional trauma, violent reactions, etc. We had to basically create our own SEMH unit in school. And Fig, the moving teacher, has been back on to say that the majority are losing teacher attention because the high amount of needs that teachers are managing, because the teacher themselves is completely kind of overwhelmed by the situation. Thank you very much both for your contributions to tonight's show. Really appreciate it.
One last point on that. I do think that there is, I'll go back to my original point, a kind of an ideological sort of civil war brewing. And I'd sit somewhere in the middle. I do want consistency. I do want some rules, but I do appreciate on a case-by-case and individual basis, there are children out there who need help. It's targeting. It's really hard when you've got so much demand and you have parents who shout loudly for their child.
Yeah,
there are those children who don't have their champions, who don't have those type of parents, and they get undiagnosed needs. It goes back to the postcode lottery. It goes back to the inconsistency in our schooling and education system. Should you live in the right postcode, you are likely to get, a higher. If your parents are motivated and have cultural capital, they will push to get your needs met. And that's not fair, because there are children who are failed by the system. There are some that get through the system. I have friends who've gone through education undiagnosed needs and they turned out absolutely fine. They didn't let those needs, later on in life, they were diagnosed dyslexic, they were diagnosed with ADHD, etc. There are others who went the other way. There's always these things called rescuing factors. There are some children who don't have those rescuing factors because, and I do worry, that's where the county lines comes in. That's where their attendance drops off. That's where there is very much a danger that those outcomes aren't rescued by the school system, because ultimately school should be one of the places where we change those outcomes. But at the moment, we don't have the facilities, the staffing, the funding to change those outcomes. And that's the tragedy of this, that there is a gap even getting bigger and bigger. And that's really hard, because some schools are working twice as hard with less resources to try and turn around the fortunes of some of these children. And we are only scratching the surface, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, and we heard from Tony White last week about kind of the implications of this onto things like attendance as well, which we covered last week. So please feel free to listen back to that show. Well, thank you very much to Fig the Moving Teacher and Paul for being contributing to that little section. It was obviously never going to be kind of dealt with, we know that, but it was kind of just to start the conversation up and running. So this half-time point, again, Brent, you're going to be sensible this time so I can get through the script. We're going to say hello to John Catt. He's already flexing kind of ready. This show is brought to you by, in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning for school all around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. I was thinking at one point over the looking at the footballers with tattoos. What would be my tattoo? Maybe it'd be JCTTR 2524. That'd be interesting. Well, that'd start a conversation, wouldn't it? As people as you walk past, what's that? Oh, it's just John Catt Educational. I've just been reading it for the last 8 months or so. So we have got a guest coming on to talk about pay. But before he comes on, so we just kind of set the scene going back to the strikes last year and where the outcome was and what Daniel Kebede and the NEU were saying during the election on the pay deal, and then the kind of aftermath of that. Do you want to just kind of just do us a little bit of a potted history?
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to show off my T-shirt here, which says "Workers can win." There we go. So, as the resident union man of TTR, look, a strike is a last resort. The strike was called because the government was not publishing the pay review. Ironic that they've done exactly the same again. And you experience teachers like myself, I calculated I was 26% down. Inflation was at 10-11%. The government was just not really getting anywhere close to where the figures would need to be. They offered a paltry, I think it was 1 or 2%. And then we went for a strike, which was voted for, even though the anti-strike laws were trying to stop that. But the NEU got over the line, the NASUWT didn't, and unfortunately the NEU support staff didn't as well. So that left the NEU, the largest teaching union, to go on strike. And I think we did 8 days in the end, which was unnecessary because the majority of those days could have been averted, because by the end, the government did give a statutory pay rise, which was in line with what the recommendation was. So all of that was unnecessary if they just had followed the independent, which isn't always completely independent because it is constrained by budget and pay review, and that give the teachers a one-off pay rise. Now, that's not a pay rise in a sense because, you know, as I say, my pay is well down on what it was in 2010. It was a slight pay uplift with inflation, but still below inflation. So we're slightly down on what inflation was at 10-11%. Now it has gone down to about 4 to 5%. And that's where we're at the moment because the independent pay review was held back. It should have been published May, June. Why is that important? It's important to have that published so that head teachers, CEOs, schools can plan ahead for staffing for the next year. They can also start plan ahead with their budgeting because about 70 to 80% of a school's budget is staffing costs. Some are even up to 85%. So the bulk of schools' finances is staffing. And therefore, if that's your largest cost, you need to know exactly how much you've got in staffing. But you also, if you want to run an extra GCSE class, you want to, we've had all sorts of trouble at our school where we have people on 1-year contracts with teachers that you want to retain, and you're saying to them, sorry, we don't know if we can offer you a contract because the finances are not there. So it has messed around, again, with, ironically, the recruitment and retention of teachers because, you know, CEOs and schools haven't been able to know what exactly is the amount of money that they've got next year. And that leads to why was that not published? It was not published because it seems that the pay review body was looking at recommending 5.5%. And that is why probably Gillian Keegan decided to hold off on that, because that would have been slightly above what current inflation is, and that wouldn't have fitted in with their whole fiscal thing of how we're going to pay for it. So that's the current state of play. The unions could potentially be heading for another round of strikes, but this time with the Labour government, which is completely the opposite of the mood music in the last couple of weeks, because Bridget Phillipson's been talking to Daniel Kebede. There does seem to be a softening of government towards teaching and talking about recruitment and retention. Now, at every stage, this is all nice words, but it comes down to one thing. If they are going to give a pay rise to teachers, and this is what our guest, his tweet was why we've invited him on, which is I think is telling, and this is what our guest said. There are 2 things we need to know about teacher pay settlement. The first is how much, the second is how it's funded. If true, then this is a very welcome commitment to teacher recruitment and retention, but we can't fund it from existing budgets. So that's talking about 5.5%.
Okay, should we let is Dr. Hearing here so he could?
Yep, I'm here. Nice to see you.
Good evening.
Oh, hello, Paul. Are you there? Hello, good evening, Paul.
I am here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining. We can, yes, but loud and clear. Thank you very much. So Brent's just done a quick kind of potted history. Kind of, we picked your tweet up earlier on in the week. Very welcome, but where's the money? Basically, can we afford it?
Absolutely, and I mean, we have to assume that there will be some money to accompany this. If the government decide that they will agree with the school teachers' paying conditions, hope that they do. We have to assume that there will be some funding to accompany that. So, because otherwise, there just isn't the slack in the system. I don't know if there ever was, but there certainly isn't at the moment.
That's right, yeah. And Paul Johnson, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, was saying that he thinks that schools have probably budgeted for 1 or 2%, but certainly nowhere near 5.5%. So I guess you want to hear that commitment, quickly as possible, really, don't you?
Yeah. Now we're very cautious. We budgeted for 3%, but when we did that, our 3-year position looks terrible. So there's an implication for that, but that's effectively taking what we think is likely to be the worst case scenario. And if you think of inflation's now down to 2%, so therefore the costs, the increase in budgets is nominally around about 2%. So really 2% would be the sensible thing for schools to budget. And if you want to, as I say, build an extra level of caution, you might go a little bit over that. 1.5%. Recognizing that you might need to make some changes, I think is also realistic. So, but what I would say is that doesn't mean that the issue of the pay rise, I think, is really welcome, and that's not just about rewarding, great teachers doing a great job. That's really important, but it's simple market forces. It's demand and supply, and there's no point even thinking we can solve recruitment and retention if we don't consider pay as part of that, because we know that that's all the evidence says that's a key driver particularly in terms of retention and at that crucial sort of 5 to 10 year stage of teachers' career. If teachers aren't on a kind of rapid promotion profile, then the chances of them leaving go up markedly.
Yeah. Brent,
what has the unpublished pay review impact? What has it had impact-wise on yourself? Has it led you guessing, or has it caused you budget constraint problems? Has it caused you nightmares of how am I going to balance the books?
I mean, it's one of those things that is frustrating because there's no reason for it. No, I'm in Nottinghamshire, and we break up tomorrow. I think we're the last in the country. I've just come directly from a trust board meeting, which is why I'm quite formally dressed for 8:30 on a Thursday night. But so we still don't know this, but there is no reason why this can't be, why we can't have a system that gives us this information in April or May. The submission is made in February, well, December actually, when the government the final submissions are made in February, that it's considered, and it's only for political reasons that governments hang on to this till the last minute. And the last government had a really poor record for giving us decisions right at the end of term, and this is your budget from the 1st of September. So effectively, there's no way of adjusting, what you can do when your major cost is, you don't know that until the end. I can't think of any other business that would be able to run in that way.
And your staffing's 31st of May is for the last staff to resign. So that's when you'd want to be recruiting in June, wouldn't you? Really, because the end of June, that's when you'd have your staff roster for September, really, wouldn't you? And that's late even to know that. So you said about that they've done this a couple of times. Do you think it's the Department of Education? Do you think it's on the Education Ministry? Because during COVID, they were terrible for lastminute.com. They were terrible for communications. They were terrible for pay.
Sorry, Brent, I think I lost you for a second there. I don't know what's wrong with the connection.
It's okay. Is it there?
I think we just lost him for a second. The big worry for me though is obviously Paul was talking about there being very modest with his predictions and budgeting, but some schools might not have had a choice, and therefore they're going to be whacked with something, aren't they? Potentially coming down the line, and that is a huge issue, kind of going forward into this new term, that Labour are going to have to pick up straight away, or Bridget Clipson's going to have to deal with almost straight away. Are you hearing from other head teachers, Paul, that they are really, really concerned coming into September about this?
Well, there's so many budget pressures. The thing I hear from most head teachers around budget pressures is normally around SEND, actually. But there's an implication there in terms of staffing and so on. And it's for trusts, I guess, for schools in trusts, you've got some flexibility there. Because our financial year runs from September to August, and B, because you've normally got some economies of scale, or you can rob Peter to pay Paul, whatever. If you're a small maintained school or a single academy, and your staffing, you can't change your staff. If you're a small primary school, you can't suddenly drop by one teacher if you've got 4 or 5 classes, like a lot with the schools that are under most pressure. So you have so little room for manoeuvre. I wish that we could have a budget a budget settlement, including pay, that was stretched over a period of time. And you don't need to put the figures in. You just need to say, we will pay in line with inflation, for example, whatever, and however you define that. And that will be and you can, there might be some shifts around that, different grades or whatever, but this is the picture over the next 3 years. This is how budgets will change over the next 3 years. I think you have to take into account inflation, for example, but and then it would be, we'd be able to plan. We'd be able to kind of say, our trust is small trust, but we've got primary, secondary, and special. So we have different pressures and different schools at different times. We'll be able to kind of, to use our schools, keep their own budgets, but we have the capacity that we share across the schools. So you can start to plan, and it's, we deal with long-term change. Don't we have children for for 5 years or 7 years or whatever, and yet we have buildings that we have to maintain over a long period of time, and yet that crucial day-to-day thing is beyond our control, and we don't know how that happens. Now, I think that's quite an easy thing to solve, because it's just a matter of political will. And I think the reason that pay and condition documents are held back is about government having that control, being able to kind of flex that depending on other factors that are nothing to do with schools and teachers.
Do you envisage a situation where, 5.5% is awarded, but some really financially hard up trusts, and there are some very close to the wire, wouldn't pass that on, would rather than pocket some of that budget money, reinvest it in other areas? Because they aren't under that obligation, aren't they, multi-academy trusts, to actually adhere to. So that could start as sort of a situation where some staff are getting a 5.5, some staff aren't. And you have that sort of the same as Scotland, because Scotland pays, a lot better than England. England's paying. London's got its different pay structure. Do you envisage that could possibly be a scenario where you're going to get some people getting a pay rise and other people not getting a pay rise?
I think if we break away from those kind of national systems, and even though trusts can do, very, very few do, what's likely to happen is that initially happens, if you like, for positive reasons. So trusts say, we're not going to follow this because we're going to, we need to recruit more and we pay more, or we change, that we look at grades a different way. But once you break that principle that we subscribe to national pay agreements, then I think there's some dangers there. And one of my bugbears about the system that we've set up is where things happen that encourage competition that isn't healthy. So sometimes competition, I appreciate, can be healthy, but where you've got trusts who effectively are looking at for the sake of expanding in a different way or whatever, which doesn't necessarily benefit children, it might do, but it doesn't necessarily do that. So looking at, if we have trusts competing pay, for example, you might say, well, there's, teachers may benefit from that, and individual teachers might do, but certain schools wouldn't. And the difference with it, in education, we can't let schools, fail and go to the wall just because our system is set up in that way. So that collective, that national system has served us pretty well. I think then it means that we disputes happening all over the country. So I'd be really reluctant to see that happen, and I think trusts should stand up and really make that point and have some kind of real solidarity about this.
I agree. You're Nottingham, and I'm in Derbyshire, and Adam's in Derbyshire. We don't get our first slice of the pie. When you look at the educational funding and you look at per pupil, the Midlands does not get, I think, a fair crack of the whip. When you look at poverty in both our area, your area as well, do you think that's something that needs to be looked at as well? This idea of, Camden and, for instance, London gets 11,000 per pupil, and yet it's was pointed out in the general election that the council tax rates are some of the lowest in the country, and you're like, whoa, hold on a second here, it's not really fair. So do you think that's something that should be campaigned on as well? Oh, I think we've lost Paul.
I think he's just going to he'll come back in.
He'll come back, yeah. So we're saying
it's interesting thought that we're not all treated the same, are we, on this? Like, even as Paul was saying, even if there's a want to do it, always gone. We'll try and get him back because it's a really interesting kind of viewpoint. Just while we try and get Paul's question back. There he is. Hi, Paul. Back in.
I don't know what's happening, but
yeah,
anyway,
you're okay. I was just thinking about the regional funding. Do you think that's another campaign that we should be looking at? The Nottinghamshire doesn't get, I think, a fair crack of the whip when it comes to regional funding. East Midlands, Derbyshire is one of the lowest where I am. And again, for SEND, there seems to be unpredictability depending on local authority. And definitely in the likes of the East Midlands, we do not get anywhere near, considering the levels of poverty, deindustrialization, this idea of the red wall. What worries me is that coming the general election, which I stood as a candidate, education was well down the list of sort of topics that were talked about. It wasn't even coming up in debates. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's no appetite for, I think, solving the problems in education by the major parties? Because they seem to have a conspiracy of silence on this, of let's not talk about education, which, I can't understand, because 97 was all about education. So what's your theory on why education wasn't higher up the priority list?
Well, it's also interesting that the way that when education was spoken about, it was really things that sometimes are quite peripheral. I mean, there was some discussion about SEND, but it was, when we're discussing things like mobile phones, for example, which I don't know anyone who thinks they're the key priority facing education. And even, in terms of the Labour manifesto, curriculum review. I mean, I think because I wasn't sure what it meant. The curriculum should always be under review, but is that the main focus? What I think, I would really like to know what the vision for education is, and that's some of that structural things. So we have a real mess of a situation with, maintained schools, single academies, large multi-academy trusts that operate in a certain way, small ones like ours that operate in a different way. And I think it's what you end up with is inequities built into the system then, because you can't have a system that works equally well for all those different arrangements. We have local authorities with with just that ever diminishing capacity. So I think that vision for what's the structure of education, my personal view, is that we can take the system that's been evolving and we can build in more accountability, more local accountability, in particular local kind of democratic accountability, and then I think we can strengthen that so that trusts are truly kind of public entities rather than seen as these kind of remote things that only answer to the DFE. So I think there are things that we can do about that. I mean, we could be positive, and I always like to be positive actually, and say that because education wasn't a major issue, because people by and large don't perceive it in the way that they see huge waiting lists at A&E, and therefore or the way that they perceive issues around immigration, for example, which was an issue. And it's bizarre, isn't it, that the small boats is a bigger issue in the general election than the system of education, when you think, well, what has the impact? But it may be that people, the vast majority of parents, are happy with the education that their child gets at their local school, and that's a real positive thing. And so maybe that's why there aren't votes to be had, because people aren't crying out for change.
Do you think this does need to be? I don't know if you kind of picked up on Brent's point earlier, I think before we lost you, about kind of some kind of fairness in the actual funding structure. So so if you can feel comfortable with this 5%, like a school in Camden can, or somewhere else in the country can. Should there be that kind of real kind of leveling of that? So you as a head, or anyone who's running a mat, can feel confident that they've got the funds, they've got the money available to wherever they are in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a no-brainer, doesn't it? The only reason why it's been so difficult to move to a fair funding formula is because of where we're starting from. And so it costs, because you don't want schools to be funded less, it's very expensive to bring everyone up to the level of the best funded schools. So otherwise we'd have done it, because it's just such a hangover from a different period when local authorities ran education and central government by and large didn't. So there's no justification, and we see it. You talk about funded in the East Midlands school, so I know that obviously very well, where you will have a pupil who will transfer, say with a pupil with SEND will transfer from a different local authority and will arrive there, and with an and you'll say, well, we can't, you might have had that before, but you can't have it here because we don't get the funding for you to have that here.
I live on the border. Our school is on the border between Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, and it's always one of our constant problems, because we deal with Derbyshire LEA, we deal with Derby City, we deal with Nottingham City, we deal with Nottinghamshire. And the difference between the four is crazy sometimes. This child coming with no statement, no hours, and you're going, how is this possible? And we just have to jury rig it, try and do our best. And that inconsistency, but even inconsistencies in when the hours are, like you're already one day to go, where other places like Leicester finished a week ago. I think there's just so massive inconsistencies in education and a postcode lottery. It really is becoming like that, where it depends where you are to how much you're paid. And I don't think that should be the case in the UK. The teacher in Scotland should be earning more than a teacher in England. And equally, a school in East Midlands gets half the amount of a school in Camden. And then you look at the outcomes and you think, well, why are these areas not doing as well? Well, you're not fairly funding them, and you're then judging them by the same criteria, which is completely not fair, completely. So that's what I do take your point, Paul. I think I don't see the vision or the plan yet. And I don't like to say this name without feeling a revulsion, but I also would credit him. I would say that Gove at least had some sort of vision, or he had some sort of idea or philosophy. We've yet to see what the current government's actual vision or philosophy is. It's very light on that, which does worry me, because they're great at the sound bites, but scratching me at the surface, I don't see that there is a depth there yet in educational policy.
No, I think things like accountability is really important as well, because it's one thing to say, let's do this with Ofsted, and let's, but accountability once again sits within a structure, doesn't it? How do how does it work? That how are schools accountable to their communities? How do we use accountability structures to help people make things better? How do we make sure that we're not, that they're not affecting recruitment and retention and well-being and so on? So it fits with it. So tinkering with that at this point, I think there's a real opportunity, and I'm optimistic about this. Real opportunity for a new government, obviously with quite a strong mandate, quite a lot of flexibility to do things, to have it to set that vision in place. Now, I'm hoping that some of that is really around. It just takes time to do that and to talk to us. But if it would be really interesting to see how the policies that come forward, because I think, let's say, things like structures, funding, so you have to have a vision, you have to have a direction of travel, and actually we're all we're all waiting for that. We're kind of hungry for that, to understand this is what we want to do, and so Rachel Reeves' announcement, I think, was a really positive first step, because it would not have surprised me if they said, well, we can't afford this at this point, maybe some promise in the future. And it may have led to strikes, but they might have been able to pitch it at a point where or make some kind of future promise where that wasn't inevitable. But the fact that she kind of has indicated, and we know she hasn't said it yet, that she's indicated that this is, that she's likely to she's minded to approve this, is a positive sign. So let's see.
For you then,
a government spokesman is still saying is kind of still caveating this with the kind of the general quote at the minute, which is around the kind of financial or fiscal inheritance we face. I think everything they say at the minute has that as a kind of caveat next to it. Sorry, Brent, go on, Karen.
Yeah, just I think that the key point is, isn't it? It cannot come out. The pay rise cannot come out of budgets, and I think that's a red line for the unions, because that'd be robbing Peter to pay Paul. As a teacher, I don't want to get a pay rise and have that come out of budget, or my pay rise is going to be the cost of one of my colleagues. It has to be new money. It has to be financed outside of school, but school budgets have to be ring fenced. That it has the crucial, and that was the crucial point of your tweet, wasn't it? Really, it has to be, if they are going to give a pay rise, it cannot come out of any existing funding or school budgets.
No, because you just, the impact of that. There's no what effectively you'll have in lots of schools. You'll have everyone getting a little bit extra funding, apart from the 2 people who are made redundant to pay for that.
And again, you've kind of alluded to it earlier, but I will pose the question: is 5.5% enough to deal with some of the recruitment issues that are going on, or should there be some kind of pay restoration, certainly for older teachers? Not looking at anyone. Yeah, me included. Definitely felt kind of, maybe part of the strikes going forward, happened before, were because of that kind of 0%. It's really hindered certainly some older teachers that have been trapped, because a lot of the wage structures have been for newer teachers coming in, but obviously we're losing people kind of coming out because their pay is just almost, since 2010, not moved at all.
Yeah, well, and I think this is where this all comes down to what the government puts forward to the, in probably December time, to the Pay and Conditions Committee. So, sorry, am I back? So if they say, if they say what we want is, we want recruitment and retention taken into account, then I think that's a positive thing. And I think that's all they need to do. All they need to do is to say, because we know what the evidence says. We know, there's really strong evidence of the way that if you just pay, how it impacts on recruitment and retention. So I think if part of their conditions, we want, all the things they set out they want to achieve, taking into account the national picture, national economic picture, and so on, but also taking recruitment and retention into account, then I think that's, I would trust the SDPCD to do their job.
Okay, cool.
Can I say one thing before? Thank you for the job you do, because I know reading your Twitter headline, you get it from everybody. It's not easy to lead. It's not easy to lead in education, because it's tough. It's really, really tough, and it's tough when you're second guessing the government. So thanks for all you do. We need more like you, to be honest with you, because it's getting tougher, isn't it? And I'm sure that a lot of your colleagues are saying how much more of this you can take. So please keep doing the job you're doing, because we need more people like you in education.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. That's the end of that.
Oh, he's back.
He's back.
Hello again.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Good night. He's got it. This is going brilliant. If he keeps popping back up, fantastic. Yay!
Yeah. This is my signature exit. Is this is how it is.
This is what usually happens. This is what usually happens. We're like, I'm trying to end the meeting here, but the connection.
Yes.
It'd be pretty. It's pretty Paul suddenly has those like Snapchat filters, because come on, also with their bunny ears and stuff. But so we really appreciate your time, Paul. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
You say you're breaking up today?
Tomorrow.
Oh, sorry.
Insight.
Enjoy tomorrow. Enjoy tomorrow.
Don't worry, Tesco's already got back to school signs up, just in case you want.
I know. I've seen them. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is he going to pop up? No, he doesn't.
No.
Fantastic. I enjoyed that. I wish I had more guests that just keep popping
Pop it up in and out. Yeah. We John Katz. Should we say hello to John?
Right, cool. Yeah, we'll say a quick thank you to John Katz. And because this show is brought to you in partnership with John Katz Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore a full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR 2425 for 20% off your order, and you can see the website covering Brent's face, which is superb, which is what we want. Okay, we've now got a face blocker and a sound blocker in place on Teachers Talk Radio. I'm going to be having a bit of a break over August, family holidays, and except bit of things coming up on a Thursday. Brent, are you going here next week, or we're going to?
No, not next week, but the week after. Yeah, and then 22nd we will have of August. We'll have the results special.
Yeah,
so we'll have our annual results special.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll do a bit of a special for the results as well, which is fantastic. Okay, if you haven't broken up, or you're breaking up today or tomorrow, if you're Nottingham, what's Nottingham doing? How are they coming so far adrift of everyone else? You know,
I think they have a 5-week holiday. I don't think they have 6 weeks.
Is it?
I think that's what it is. Yeah, they have 5 weeks, as far as I know. Yeah.
Right, Brent, we've gone over the hour, so should we say good night? And wish you all a nice holiday if you go on holidays. And we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Good night.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where